We're told that we live in an information age. And information is, at the very least, a means to liberation. There is such a thing as information wars, and those who have the information have the power to overcome others. There's a war on information, the war of information. So we have corporations that own the information, that mediate the information, that is then to move, to motivate, to incite people. Information is worth much more than money to corporations, because here's the idea: information is all we have to live with. We can live without money, conceivably, but we cannot live without information. What is information? Well, it turns out that information is something conceived in our times on the basis of an early modern conception of reality, and more specifically of the autonomy of human discourse from any standard transcending it. So what is meant by this? At the dawn of the modern world, we have what is known as the Machiavellian Revolution, which pertains to the abstraction of human discourse, of the human. Okay. So now we have an abstract human from points of reference, standards that transcend him, what is above the human. So the human now, the new human, is an abstraction, an autonomous entity, an abstract one that gains in universality by being cut off from bonds that had characterized human political life in earlier times, in earlier ages. What does this have to do with information? Well, quite simply, by abstracting the human and human discourse from points of reference that transcend it, what we have is a new politics, a new human life that is technical. It is approached mechanically or mechanistically, without reference to metaphysical questions, a new ethics, a new conception of values. Well, it turns out that if the human is not taking its bearings from what is above it, then it seeks to be autonomous, but it realizes quickly that its autonomy has to be conquered by integrating what is below the human, the subhuman, within itself, within the human. So the human is now a self-constructed, self-made entity that has to integrate with it, has to conquer what we call today nature, but it has to conquer the subhuman, that which cannot be a standard of right and wrong. For indeed, if I look at a cockroach, that cockroach is not going to tell me on its own what is right and wrong. I cannot start behaving like a cockroach. I sense that. Perhaps I can integrate the cockroach into my life by examining the cockroach, by studying it, by learning from it, and integrating what I learn into my own behavior. But now, how do I approach the subhuman? How do I approach the human? Once that bond is severed between the ethical and the metaphysical, between the human and the divine, ultimately, yes? And the answer is, here we go, here we come full circle. The answer is information. Information is what knowledge is once we have cut it off from the divine, which is to say, from the good in itself, or from God. So what do we have here? Information is a kind of material, abstract, rarefied, set of particles, as it were, that we integrate into our lives. So the natural world now is understood to be a world of information. But our human world is a world of information too. Indeed, information brings the two together. It is what everything now has in common. When we look at nature, we look at it in terms of information, data. The human world, information. The human being, the mind, information. And as we gather this information, this data, we become more powerful and more capable of defending ourselves in the face of, in the absence of God, violence, hell, evil. But now, information can be manipulated. Information is selected. Information is mediated. Hence the wars. So we have war over data. Information is mechanically constituted, mechanically conquered. You don't need to be a very good man to have a lot of information. You can be a devil and have a lot of information. Information is conceived here as power, raw power, that can be integrated into doing something, into an enterprise. Where does this leave us? Well, it leaves us with a big question, for one thing. What does all of this information presuppose? If knowledge is essentially information, or the integration of information into an enterprise, so all knowledge is practical knowledge, all knowledge has to be put into practice, then perhaps the game is over. Information, for one thing, does not tell us where we're supposed to go. But it seems that the underlying assumption here is that we're supposed to go where power lies. So the enterprises are to move in the direction of power. We integrate the data to do something. What do? We express, we develop, we create, perhaps, power. We manifest power. And this notion of power seems to be the guiding principle of our age. But power alone is strife. Power alone, at the very least, is likely to be violence. Do we not seek more? Is there a way out of this condition? And the way out, common sense would tell us, is akin to the way in. We have gotten rid of a knowledge that is irreducible to information and its manipulation. A knowledge that is rooted in goodness. A political knowledge that is rooted in goodness. Should we recover that? And the recovery of a knowledge rooted in goodness would seem to require a return to a way of speaking that does not ground itself in the regime of information. To seek a way out of contemporary violence is to let go of the compulsion to acquire, to accumulate, and to manipulate and implement information. To learn here is not to gather, to hunt down and gather information so that we may empower ourselves. It is rather to expose ourselves to the fundamental questions that underlie and are eclipsed by the modern quest for information.